They marched for civil rights, they put a man on the moon, they built the modern economy from the ground up, and now the internet calls them out of touch. Baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964, the generation that literally reshaped the world, and somehow became the generation everyone loves to blame. But here's the thing, nobody stops to ask, why are they the way they are? What psychological forces shaped an entire generation into the most ambitious, most stubborn, and most misunderstood group of people alive today? Let me be clear about what this video is not. This is not a "okay boomer" hit piece, and it's not a nostalgia trip about how everything was better back then. Both of those are lazy. And you deserve better. What we're going to do instead is look at the actual psychology, the events, the conditions, the invisible forces that built the boomer mind from the inside out. Because when you understand what shaped them, the things that drive you crazy about them suddenly start making perfect sense. Stick around for point number 4. It explains a pattern you've seen 1,000 times but never had a name for. And once you hear it, you won't be able to unsee it. To understand boomers, you have to understand the world they were born into. World War II had just ended. The Allied forces had won. And in the United States and across much of the Western world, there was an explosion, not of bombs, but of hope. Economies boomed, suburbs spread, factories hired anyone willing to show up. A single income could buy a house, a car, and a comfortable life. For the first time in decades, the future didn't look like something to survive. It looked like something to own. And that's the critical detail. Boomers didn't just grow up in prosperity. They grew up believing prosperity was the default. Psychologists call this baseline anchoring. Whatever conditions you experience during your formative years become your definition of normal. So when boomers say things like, "I bought my first house at 24, they're not bragging. In their psychological reality, that was normal. And they genuinely struggle to understand why it isn't anymore. Not because they don't care, but because their baseline was set in a world that no longer exists. If there's one psychological trait that defines the boomer generation more than any other, it's this. They fuse their identity with their career. And there's a reason for that. The post-war economy didn't just offer jobs, it offered a deal. A social contract. You show up, you work hard, you stay loyal, and in return, the company takes care of you. Pension, healthcare, stability, a gold watch at retirement. That deal shaped an entire generation's psychology. Work wasn't just how you earned money. It was how you proved your worth. How you measured yourself against your peers. How you answered the most fundamental human question. Am I enough? Psychologist Abraham Maslow would recognize this immediately. For boomers, career became the primary vehicle for self-actualization, and this explains something younger generations often find baffling. Why boomers can't stop talking about work, why they judge people by their job title, why retirement feels like an identity crisis rather than a reward. They're not obsessed with work. They're obsessed with the meaning they built on top of it. And pulling that away feels like pulling the ground out from under them. Here's the contradiction that drives everyone crazy. How did the generation that protested Vietnam, marched for civil rights, and championed counterculture become the generation now associated with corporate conservatism and resistance to change? And the answer is one of the most fascinating psychological patterns in history. In the 1960s and 70s, young boomers genuinely believed they were going to change the world. And in many ways, they did. But then something happened that always happens. Life got complicated. Mortgages, kids, responsibilities. The idealism didn't die. It got buried under practicality. Psychologist Daniel Levinson described this as the midlife transition, the phase where people shift from questioning the system to protecting their place within it. And for boomers, that shift was amplified by the sheer size of their generation. There were so many of them competing for the same resources that the ones who succeeded had to fight harder than anyone to hold on to what they'd built. So when a boomer resists change today, they're not being hypocritical. They're protecting a structure they spent their entire adult life constructing. The rebel didn't disappear. The rebel just built something worth defending. Now here's the one I told you about. The pattern you've seen everywhere but never had the language for. Boomers grew up in an era of institutional trust. You trusted the government. You trusted the church. You trusted the news anchor. You trusted your employer. The system worked, or at least it appeared to work, and you didn't need to question it. And then, one by one, those institutions betrayed them. The Kennedy assassination shook their childhood. Vietnam shattered their trust in the military. Watergate proved the government would lie to their face. The economic recessions of the 70s and 80s broke the promise that hard work always pays off. And decades later, the 2008 financial crisis wiped out their retirement savings while the banks got bailed out. Psychologists call this institutional betrayal trauma. It's what happens when the systems you were taught to believe in turn against you. And the response is almost always the same. You don't stop believing in systems. You just stop trusting new ones. That's why boomers cling to what they know. That's why they're suspicious of new technology, new media, new structures. It's not stubbornness, it's scar tissue. They learned, the hard way, multiple times, that the next big thing isn't always better. Sometimes it's just another institution waiting to let you down. And finally, the one that ties everything together. And it's the one that might actually make you feel something. Boomers are now between 61 and 79 years old. And regardless of how healthy, active, or sharp they are, they're facing a psychological reality that no amount of denial can outrun. Mortality. Erikson, the same psychologist we mentioned in the Gen Alpha video, described the final major psychological stage of life as generativity versus stagnation. It's the phase where a person's deepest need shifts from building something to knowing it mattered. This is why your boomer parent keeps bringing up what they sacrificed for you. Why your boomer boss won't stop telling stories from the early days of the company. Why that uncle at Thanksgiving keeps repeating the same life advice you've heard 40 times. They're not trying to lecture you. They're trying to transmit something. They want to know, desperately, sometimes clumsily, that what they built, what they endured, what they gave up, actually left a mark. And the cruelest irony? The generation that was told they could change the world is now terrified that the world moved on without them. So the next time a boomer frustrates you, with their stubbornness, their unsolicited advice, their refusal to adapt, try this. Instead of rolling your eyes, ask yourself what shaped them. What promises were made to them? What those promises cost when they broke? Because behind the stereotypes is a generation that was handed an extraordinary world, watched it crack, and spent the rest of their lives trying to hold it together. That's not a punchline. That's a psychology lesson. Tell me in the comments, did any of these points change how you see the boomers in your life? I'm genuinely curious. And if you want the full series, we're breaking down every generation one by one. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you in the next one.